The world that EATS settlers. The relocation office on Thresh Station called Vale's Reach, a Category 2 frontier parcel. That was the language they used. Category 2. Like it was a box on a form. Like it meant something manageable, something surveyable, something a man with a toolbox and a decade of grief and 2 containers of flat-pack agricultural equipment could reasonably expect to tame. What Vale's Reach actually was: 43,000 hectares of primary growth highland forest on a world the Ketheri had been farming for 600 years before humanity ever figured out faster-than-light travel. The soil was iron-dark and extraordinarily fertile. The air was breathable without a mask, if you didn't mind the pollen count in high summer. The gravity ran about 8% heavier than Earth standard, which you stopped noticing after the first month and started noticing again every morning when you tried to get out of bed. The frontier office didn't mention the predators. They mentioned wildlife. Category 2 worlds had wildlife. That was in the form. Wildlife present. Hazard classification, moderate. Recommended precaution. Standard perimeter fencing, motion sensor array, discharge deterrent on outer posts. What the form didn't explain was that the wildlife on Vale's Reach had spent 6 centuries learning to treat perimeter fencing as a puzzle, or that motion sensor arrays required maintenance, and maintenance required time, and time was the one thing a single-operator settler did not have in the first growing season. Or that discharge deterrent was bureaucratic language for a barely adequate shock fence that a fully grown teeth rack would hit once, absorb, shake itself off, and walk through on the second try. I found that out in my 3rd week. My name is Corvin Adler. I was a structural engineer, 41 years old. Before Vale's Reach, I lived on Meridian Station with my wife and our daughter, and then, in the space of 11 days, a pressure seal failure in the residential block took Lena from me, and a secondary cascade failure 3 days later during the evacuation took Petra, who was 9 years old and had her mother's way of tilting her head when she was thinking something through. That was 2 years ago. I am not going to explain what those 2 years looked like. I don't have the words and I wouldn't use them if I did. What I will say is that at the end of those 2 years I was standing in a relocation office on Thresh Station, and a man behind a desk was showing me land grants on Category 2 frontier worlds, and I looked at the one on Vale's Reach and I thought, the worst thing that can happen to me there is that I die. And dying, at that point, felt like a manageable outcome. I want to be clear. I was not trying to die. I'm not sure I was trying to live either. I was trying to do something with my hands on a piece of ground that was far enough from everything I'd lost that the shape of my life might eventually stop feeling like an absence wearing a human outline. So I signed the land grant. I packed my containers. I shipped myself to Vale's Reach. The teeth rack came through the fence at 300 on a Tuesday morning in my 23rd day on the parcel. I heard the outer post go, a hard crack of discharged current, and then nothing, which was the nothing that meant the fence was down, and I was out of my bunk and into my boots before I was fully awake. By the time I reached the equipment bay door, I could hear it, the heavy 4-beat rhythm of something very large moving through the dark between the tree line and my newly seeded eastern field. A teeth rack is, broadly speaking, what you would get if you crossed a terrestrial bear with something that had no fear response and significantly more patience. They are not fast. They don't need to be fast. They mass between 400 and 600 kilograms at full growth. Their hide is thick enough that a standard discharge fence registers to them roughly the way a static shock registers to a human, unpleasant, briefly. And they have a habit, when they find something edible, of standing over it and simply waiting for anything smaller than themselves to get tired of objecting. I grabbed the discharge pole from the bay, a 2-meter staff that delivered a stronger focused jolt than the fence posts, enough to genuinely deter most wildlife the relocation office's moderate category actually covered, and I went out into the dark. I found the teeth rack in the eastern field. It was, as advertised, very large. It stood in the middle of my barley plot, 10 days of seeding and soil amendment and careful attention to the irrigation gradient, and it was eating. Not dramatically, just methodically, the way something eats when it has nowhere to be and no reason to hurry. I hit it with the discharge pole. It turned and looked at me. I hit it again. It took 2 steps toward me, not a charge, more like a suggestion. In the interest of accuracy, I did not handle the next 40 seconds particularly well. I got the pole between us, backed toward the fence line, tripped on the outer post housing that the teeth rack had knocked loose on the way in, went down hard on my left side, and lost the pole when I landed on it wrong, and it discharged against my own grip and put a burn across my palm that made my hand go numb to the wrist. The teeth rack watched this, then it turned back to the barley. I lay on the ground with a numb hand and a bruised hip and listened to my eastern field being eaten, and I thought, not for the first time, Category 2. I was still lying there, not unconscious, just conducting a fairly thorough assessment of what I'd done wrong and how badly the hand was going to hurt when the feeling came back, when something dropped out of the dark from the direction of the tree line and hit the teeth rack across the back of the neck with what I can only describe as a targeted, ferocious precision that made the animal lurch sideways, shake its enormous head, and decide almost immediately that it had somewhere else to be. It left. I watched it go. Then I looked at what had driven it off. She was standing at the edge of my field. In the dark I could see the outline of her, tall, lean, built in a way that suggested speed over mass, and 2 things that the dark couldn't hide. The faint luminescent striping along her forearms and the backs of her hands, pale amber against dark gray skin, and the quality of stillness she held, which was not the stillness of something waiting to be seen, but the stillness of something that had already assessed everything in its vicinity, and found nothing worth adjusting its posture for. She was holding a weapon I didn't have a name for, not a firearm, something with a long, weighted head on a short grip, impact-based, built for exactly the kind of precise strike she just delivered. She looked at me on the ground. I looked at her. She said something in a language I didn't know. The tone was not warm. It was not unkind either, exactly. It was the tone of a person making an observation that they do not expect to be disputed. "I don't speak Kathiri," I said. She looked at me a moment longer. Then she said, in trade standard, with an accent that clipped the consonants and stretched the vowels into something almost musical, "Your fence is down." "Yes," I said. "You went at a mature teeth rack with a single discharge pole." "Yes." A pause. "Why?" "It was eating my field." She looked at the field. She looked at me. Something shifted in her expression that I couldn't fully read in the dark, not quite contempt, not quite amusement, something more complicated than either. "Your hand," she said. "Numb. It'll come back." "Yes," she agreed, and the word carried a flatness that I would later understand was her version of asterisk obviously. "Can you stand?" I stood. It took a moment and wasn't elegant, but I stood. She watched, made no move to help, and when I was upright she looked at me with the same thorough, assessing quality she'd turned on the retreating teeth rack. "You are the new settler," she said. It wasn't a question. "Corvin Adler." She didn't offer her name. She looked at the broken fence post, at the downed outer housing, at the field. Then she looked back at me with an expression that had resolved into something I could read more clearly. She had made a judgment, and the judgment was not favorable, and she was not particularly concerned about whether I knew it. "Fix your fence," she said. And she walked back into the tree line and disappeared. Part 2, the Kethiri woman. Her name, I learned, was Varith Nasolis. I learned this not from her but from Don Hessler, the nearest neighboring settler, who had a parcel 8 kilometers to the north, and had been on Vale's Reach for 3 years, and had the particular manner of someone who has spent a long time being cautiously respected by a world that could kill him. Varith, Don said when I described her. Tall, gray skin, amber stripe markings, moves like she's annoyed at gravity for applying to her at all. That's accurate. She's a Solis line huntress, old family. They've held territory in this highland region for, I don't know, centuries. Her family were here before the colonial parcels were drawn, before humans were in this system. He poured more coffee. She tolerates the settlers on the northern parcels. Helped Yan Petrov when his irrigation failed last dry season. Doesn't talk much. Doesn't like it when you say thank you. Why not? He shrugged. Kathiri huntresses, the old line ones, the territorial ones, they've got a concept. I can't pronounce it right. Sounds like asterisk Verathsal. Roughly means the obligation of the capable to the land they claim. If she helps you, it's because you're on land adjacent to hers and your incompetence is her problem. She's not doing you a favor. She's maintaining the territory. I thought about this. So she drove off the teeth rack because a dead settler and a broken-down parcel attracts more scavengers and more instability than a live one who fixes his fence. He gave me a steady look. Don't take it personally. Don't make a fuss about it. And for the love of all reasonable things, fix your fence. I fixed my fence. I saw her again 9 days later. I was replacing the sensor housing on the eastern post. I'd ordered a heavier grade unit, military surplus, the kind that would actually register to a teeth rack as something worth avoiding. And I looked up from the wiring, and she was standing at the edge of the tree line watching me. Not hiding, just watching, the way you watch something you're assessing. The new housing, she said. Military surplus J-series. Yes. Better, she paused. You wired the secondary relay wrong. I looked at the relay. I looked at the diagram I'd printed from the installation manual. I looked at the relay again. She was right. I fixed it. She watched me fix it without offering to help and without looking away. When I finished, she said nothing, simply turned and began to walk along the tree line, doing something I didn't understand, checking something, measuring something, moving with the specific directed attention of someone who has work to do and is doing it. After a moment I said, I'm going to make dinner if you want. The walking stopped. A pause. What are you making? She said. She did not turn around. Stew. It's not impressive, but it's warm. Another pause longer. Then, I have rounds to finish. There's enough if you finish before dark. She said nothing. She walked on. I went inside and made the stew and ate alone, and I thought that was the end of it. And then at 20 minutes before dark there was a sound at the door, not a knock exactly, more of a deliberate presence, a making herself known. And when I opened it, she was standing there with the luminescent striping along her forearms slightly brighter than it had been in the field, which I didn't yet know how to read. Rounds finished early, she said. Come in, I said. Part 3, what does not bend? She did not come in the way a guest comes in. She came in the way a person enters a space they intend to fully understand, pausing in the doorway to take stock of everything. Looking at the flat-pack furniture I'd assembled, and the tools hanging organized on the bay wall and the framed photograph on the shelf by the window, which I saw her eyes find and rest on for exactly 1 moment before moving on. She sat at the table and ate the stew, and she ate it seriously, with the focused attention of someone for whom food is fuel and fuel is not a thing to be wasteful about. She didn't compliment it. She also had 2 full bowls, which I counted as a different kind of compliment. I ate across from her and said nothing because she gave every impression of being a person who found unnecessary speech irritating, and I had not, since Meridian Station, been someone who needed to fill silence. Halfway through the second bowl she said, the photograph. I knew which one, my wife and daughter. A pause, they are not with you. They died 2 years ago. She looked at me. The quality of that look, it was not pity, which I would have found difficult. It was more like she was taking an accurate accounting. She was receiving the information and placing it correctly. How, she said. I told her the pressure seal, the cascade failure, Petra tilting her head. She listened without moving, without changing her expression, and when I finished she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "And you came here?" "Yes." "To this world?" "Yes." She looked at her bowl. The Solis line has a saying, "The ground does not ask what broke you before you knelt to plant, it only asks if you will keep planting." She paused. "It is not meant as comfort, it is meant as a statement of fact." "I understand," I said. "I thought you might." She finished the stew. She stood. At the door she paused and said, without turning, "The southern approach to the creek has soft ground this time of year. Run your tractor line from the ridge, not the valley floor, or you'll lose a wheel housing." Then she left. I ran the tractor line from the ridge. This is how it went for the first 2 months. Not consistently, not predictably. She would appear at the edge of the tree line and watch something I was doing and then either walk on or come closer and say something brief and accurate that invariably saved me 3 hours of learning something the hard way. Once a week, sometimes twice, she appeared at the door near dark. I made food. She ate it. She didn't explain herself. She didn't ask permission. She simply came when she came and left when she left, and I did not treat her visits as favors or obligations because I had absorbed from Dawn's explanation, and from the way she inhabited every space she occupied, that she would find both framings insulting. She came because she came. I made food because she was there. The territory was maintained. I learned things slowly. The luminescent striping along her forearms and hands, she called them asterisk Saleth marks asterisk, family inheritance, carried by the Solis line through 12 generations. They brightened with exertion, with strong emotion, with focused attention. She didn't talk about this directly. I observed it and she noticed me observing it and said, without inflection, "They respond to internal state. I cannot make them do otherwise." "That would be inconvenient," I said. "At times," she agreed. I learned that she had a formal rank among the Kethiri territorial hunters, something that translated approximately as asterisk primary range keeper asterisk, which meant that the highland territory of about 60,000 hectares was her responsibility to manage, monitor, and defend. The settler parcels fell within her range. The settlers were, in her framing, a feature of the territory she was responsible for, not subjects, not quite neighbors, but entities whose stability contributed to the stability of the land. She was not warm about this, but she was consistent, and I had learned since Meridian Station that consistency is worth more than warmth. I learned that she had a house, lodge asterisk was a closer word, 2 kilometers into the tree line, built into a natural rock shelf in a way that made it nearly invisible from outside unless you knew where to look. She had never invited anyone into it. This she told me without drama, simply as a fact, the way she told me the tractor line should run from the ridge. I did not ask why. I did not suggest it should be otherwise. I planted my southern field. I fixed my fence twice more, once proactively, once after a younger Teethrack tested it and learned the J-Series housing was not a puzzle it wanted to solve. I repaired the irrigation gradient, extended the sensor array, built a second equipment bay against the east wall of the main structure. And I cooked dinner, and sometimes she was there, and sometimes she wasn't, and I found, to my cautious and somewhat bewildered attention, that on the nights she wasn't there the silence had a different quality than it used to. Part 4. The Kethiri come down hard. In the 4th month of the growing season, something changed in her. Not dramatically. She was not a dramatic person, but I had spent 4 months learning the particular grammar of her silences, and I could read the difference between her usual watchful quiet and a quiet that had something pressed under it. She came 3 evenings running, Ate without talking much, left earlier than usual. The Saleth asterisk marks on her forearms were dimmer than I'd come to associate with her, not the bright amber of exertion or focus, but a flatter, muted tone. On the third night I said, "Something's wrong." She looked at me. "Nothing is wrong with the territory." I didn't say the territory. A pause, she put her spoon down. "The Solis Council," she said. "My family, they are reviewing the territorial assignment, whether the Highland Range should remain in a single keeper's management." She said this with a flatness that took visible effort to maintain. "There are those who believe the presence of the settlement parcels has compromised the territory's character. That a rangekeeper who allows settlers to persist is no longer maintaining the Solis line standard." I was quiet for a moment. "Are you likely to lose the assignment?" "I do not lose things," she said, and the flatness cracked for just a moment, a hard, bright edge underneath it. "But the council meets at the summer mark, 12 days. They will want to walk the range and make their assessment. And they'll see the parcels. They will see that settlers are present and stable on what was once exclusive Solis territory, yes." She looked at the table. "I have managed this range for 11 years. I have held the Teethrak populations at balance. The river levels are stable. The old growth corridors are intact. The parcel settlers represent less than 3% of total land coverage and have not significantly disrupted." She stopped. It was the first time I had heard her lose the thread of a sentence. "Vareth," I said. She looked up. "What can I do?" It was not an offer of a favor. I said it the way she would have said it, as a statement of available resources, one entity in a territory asking another what the territory required. She understood it that way. I watched her receive it. "Nothing," she said. "It is a Ketheri matter. The parcels are the point of contention." "Yes." "I am on a parcel." "Yes." "Then it is not entirely a Ketheri matter." She was quiet for a long time. The Saleth asterisk marks did something I hadn't seen before. They pulsed once, a slightly warmer tone, then settled back to flat. "The council will want to see the range," she said finally. "They will walk it. They assess," she paused, "not just the land but the Varathsal asterisk, the keeper's conduct in relation to everything on the range, every entity, every choice. So they'll want to see how you've managed the settlers. How I have maintained the Varathsal with respect to all elements of the territory." I thought about this, then let them see. She looked at me. "Show them," I said. "Show them the fences I'm not breaking. Show them the fields I planted where you showed me the drainage runs. Show them the tractor lines I moved from the valley floor. Show them the creek approach where the soft ground is still intact because I went the right way around." I paused. "You've been keeping this range well. We're part of what you've kept." A very long silence. "You don't know what the council is like," she said. "No, but I know what you've done for this land for 4 months and I can tell them so." She looked at me with the thorough, assessing quality she had turned on me that first night in the eastern field. Held it for long enough that I felt it the way you feel a physical thing. Then she said, "They will not be warm about it." "I don't need warm." Something happened in her expression that I had not seen before. Not quite a smile, she was not, I had come to understand, a person who smiled casually or perhaps at all. But something opened briefly, like a door moved by wind rather than intent, and then it was gone. "No," she said quietly, "I don't imagine you do." Part 5, The Council Walks. There were 7 of them. They arrived on a morning when the Highland air had the particular clarity it got before the season turned cold and bright, the old-growth canopy doing something golden at the edges. Vareth brought them to my parcel first, which I later understood was deliberate. If they were going to object to the settlers, she wanted the objection raised early, while she still had 5 hours of walking time to address it. 7 Ketheri elders and range assessors, and even to my human eye the way they moved communicated authority. Not the performed authority of bureaucrats, but something quieter and more total. The authority of people who had been making consequential judgments for a long time and no longer needed to announce it. They looked at my fences. They looked at the sensor array. They walked the boundary line between the parcel and the tree line and examined, in a way that was very close to the way Vareth examined things, the conditions at the interface. Whether the soil was disturbed beyond the cultivated area, whether the water table showed signs of drainage interference, whether the wildlife movement patterns at the boundary were disrupted. One of them, a woman older than the others, with Saleth asterisk marks that ran all the way to her shoulders, which I would learn meant a Solis line elder of considerable standing, asked me something in Ketheri. Vareth translated. She asks why you are here on this world, alone. I looked at the elder. My wife and daughter died, I said. I needed ground under my feet. Vareth translated this. The elder listened. Then she said something else. She asks, Vareth said, and her voice was very controlled, whether the ground has been sufficient. I thought about it honestly. Not yet, I said, but I think it might be in time. The elder nodded. She said something that wasn't a question. Vareth was quiet for a moment before she translated. She says, the ground asks only that you keep planting. I looked at Vareth. She was looking at the elder, her face composed, the Saleth asterisk marks along her forearms very still. Yes, I said, that's what I've been told. The council walked the range for 3 days. On the second day, in the afternoon, the elder, her name was Solas Naveth, matriarch of the Solis line, walked beside me for about an hour along the southern field boundary, while Vareth ranged ahead running the route checks she ran every afternoon. Through her own limited trade standard and my complete absence of Ketheri, we managed something like a conversation. She asked about the photograph on my shelf. I told her. She listened with the same quality of receiving that Vareth had, accurate, non-pitying, placing the information correctly. She asked what I thought of the Highland Range. I told her what I actually thought, that it was one of the most coherent and careful pieces of land management I'd seen, that the water balance in the creek network was precise, that the Teethrack population was stable enough to be a presence without being a crisis, that the old-growth corridors were intact in a way that suggested someone had been working very deliberately for a very long time to keep them that way. She listened. She said something in Ketheri. I asked her to translate it. She thought for a moment, working the trade standard carefully, and then said, "A keeper who is seen in the quality of what she keeps." I looked at the old-growth tree line. Yes, I said, that's exactly right. On the third morning, the council delivered their assessment to Vareth. I was not present for this. It was a Ketheri matter. I made myself busy with the irrigation check and stayed on the far side of the parcel and gave the Highland Range the respect it was owed. After an hour Vareth came. She stood at the edge of the eastern field. She looked at me across the length of it. The assignment is confirmed, she said. The range remains Solis line. My management is assessed as within the full tradition of *Verath Sol. A pause. The presence of the settler parcels was assessed as an expression of the range keeper's judgment, not a compromise of it. Good, I said. She looked at me. The elder, she said, Solas Naveth, she said you spoke well of the range. I said what was true. You said it to the council matriarch of the Solis line. Yes. She was quiet. The Saleth asterisk marks along her forearms were doing something I hadn't seen before, not the warm amber of exertion or the flat muted tone of suppressed trouble, but something I didn't have a name for yet, something that seemed to come from deeper in, steadier. Why, she said. Because it's what I see, I said. I live on this range, you keep it well, that's just true. She looked at the field for a long time. "Corvin," she said. It was the first time she had used my name. "Yes," I said. "I would like to show you something." Part 6, inside. She walked me into the tree line. 2 kilometers. The forest changed as we went, the cultivated edge scrub giving way to true old growth, the canopy closing above us into something cathedral tall, the light going from open morning bright to a filtered green gold that moved as the wind moved through the upper branches. The ground cover was thick and soft, and the air had a different quality here, older, damper, full of something I could only call *depth*. She walked without hurry and without narration. I followed and said nothing and watched the forest, and the forest was extraordinary, not in a dramatic way. In the way that something is when it has been very carefully left to be entirely itself for a very long time. The lodge was in a rock shelf that angled out from a hillside, nearly invisible until you were 20 meters from it, and then suddenly completely visible, not because it announced itself, but because you could see how perfectly it had been placed, the way it used the angle of the stone for wind protection and the natural overhang for rain cover and the fall of the hillside for drainage. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing had built this here and built it to last. She stopped at the door. She put her hand against the frame in a gesture I didn't understand, not opening it, just resting there for a moment. The Saleth asterisk marks along her wrist and forearm were bright now. Brighter than I'd seen them. Then she opened the door and said, "Come inside." I had expected, without quite knowing I expected it, something sparse. A warrior's lodge. Functional, minimal, everything in its place for use rather than for anything else. What it actually was, full. Not cluttered, organized with the same precise attention she brought to everything, but full of things that had been kept because they mattered. A wall of handwritten notes and charts and range maps, dense with detail and annotation. Shelves of what I took to be Ketheri natural science texts alongside specimens, stones, seed casings, dried plants, small bones, things I didn't have names for. A hearth built into the rock wall with a clean, careful structure of laid stone that had clearly been tended for years. Hanging from the ceiling beams, 3 weapons, 2 of which I recognized as variants of what she'd used on the teeth rack. One I didn't know. On a shelf near the window, this is what stopped me, was a set of small objects. Not specimens, personal objects. A carved piece of dark wood worn smooth with handling. A cord of braided fiber in 3 colors. A small disc of something amber and translucent that caught the light. A photograph, Ketheri print format, of 2 women, one older, one younger, standing on a rock outcrop above the highland canopy. She watched me look at these things. "My mother," she said, "and her mother." "Is your mother?" "She died 6 years ago." This was her territory before mine. I looked at the photograph. The older woman had Saleth asterisk marks that ran all the way to her collar, the way the elder Sola's Naveths had. The younger woman, who was clearly Vareth, a few years younger than she was now, was standing beside her with an expression I recognized, because it was the same expression she had in the eastern field the first night. Thorough, assessing, taking an accurate accounting of everything in front of her. Except in the photograph there was something else in it too. Something open, the way a door is open. She was looking at her mother. "She would have liked you," Vareth said. "She believed," she paused, "she believed the ground asked only that you keep planting." "I know," I said, "the saying." "You told me." "She told me," she paused, "when I was 17 and I had lost something and I thought the loss was permanent. She said it as a statement of fact, not as comfort. I believed her." I looked at the photograph for another moment. Then I looked at Vareth. The Saleth asterisk marks were very bright, the steadiest I had seen them. The light they gave was not the amber of exertion. It had gone warmer than that, deeper, something in the gold range, and it was completely steady, not pulsing, just present. "Vareth," I said. "Yes." "Why did you bring me here?" She was quiet for long enough that the question lived in the room between us. Because, she said, no one has been inside this lodge in 6 years, since my mother. She paused. And I have spent 4 months watching you keep planting, and the council is confirmed. And I? Another pause, the Saleth asterisk marks doing something very slight, a warmth rather than a brightness shift. I am not a person who does things by half measures. When I decide something, I decide it. What have you decided? I said. She looked at me with the full weight of that thorough, assessing gaze. This time it didn't feel like being evaluated by something that had found the verdict unfavorable. This time it felt like being seen, accurately, all the way to what was actually there. That you belong on this range, she said, not as a settler on a parcel, not as an entity whose stability contributes to the territory. A breath. She seemed to be selecting the word with the precision she brought to everything, as someone whose presence on this ground is correct. Correct, I said. In Ketheri, she said, there is a word, solis verath. It means roughly, she paused, the person who fits the ground you keep, who is part of what the territory is. She looked at the window, at the old-growth light coming through it, and then back at me. It is not a word for a guest or a neighbor. It is a word for someone who is. She stopped. Inside, I said. She looked at me. The Saleth asterisk marks went bright enough that the room was briefly warmer with it. Yes, she said, inside. Part 7, what the ground asks. I did not move into the lodge that day, or that week. That's not the kind of thing that happens in a day. She knew that, and I knew that, and neither of us was interested in doing things wrong. What happened instead was this. I came in from the east side. She ran her rounds from the lodge. We met in the middle, the way territory and territory that share a boundary always eventually work out where the line is, not by force, not by treaty, but by the slow accumulation of presence and adjustment, and the discovery that the line is more comfortable in some places than others. She showed me the range in a different way than I'd seen it before, not the settler-facing side, the fence line and tractor route side, but the range-keeper's side. The old-growth corridors and why they ran where they did. The teeth-rack movement patterns and what they told you about the health of the prey population, which told you about the health of everything below it. The creek network and the way the water levels through the year mapped directly to the stability of the highland soil. She showed me these things seriously, the way she did everything, with the assumption that I was capable of receiving accurate information and doing something useful with it. I showed her things too, how the irrigation gradient I'd built could be extended across the field boundary with a shared header better efficiency for both plots. How the sensor array model I'd sourced could be adapted with minor modification to serve as a perimeter monitor for the lodge. Things that were useful, things that were accurate. The dinners moved. Sometimes my parcel, sometimes the lodge. She cooked Ketheri food twice, something slow braised from an animal I didn't have a name for, intensely savory, served with a grain that I'd later identify as a highland native species she cultivated in a small plot behind the lodge. Both times she watched me eat it with the concentrated attention of someone conducting an experiment. Both times I had 2 portions. The grain, I said the second time, could it be grown at lower altitude? She looked at me. Why? I have field space. If it can adapt to lower altitude, I can grow more of it. Better supply. A pause. You want to grow Ketheri grain? It's the best thing I've eaten since I came to this world. Something moved in her face. The Saleth asterisk marks pulsed once warm. I will bring you seed stock, she said. The eastern field, the drainage is right. I know, I said. You told me. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the precision of someone choosing to be exact, you remember everything I tell you. Yes. Why? I looked at her. Because you're never wrong. The Saleth asterisk marks went steady and warm and didn't flicker, and she looked at me for a long moment that had a quality to it. The quality of something that has been moving slowly in one direction and has now arrived at a place it intended to arrive. "Corvin," she said. "Yes." "The elder Solas Naveth. She said something to me at the assessment." "What did she say?" "She said," Vareth paused, selecting it carefully, "she said that the settler on the eastern parcel was Solis Verath *, that I should not be a fool about it." I looked at her. "She said the matriarch of my family's line said this. The matriarch of 12 generations of Solis line range keepers, who has assessed territory and keeper character for 60 years. She said it without weight, the way she said things that were simply accurate. She is not wrong about these things." "No," I said, "I imagine she isn't." Vareth looked at the window. The old growth was doing something gold in the evening light, the way it did at this hour, the filtered warmth of late sun through 1,000 meters of canopy. "My mother's saying," she said, "the ground does not ask what broke you before you knelt to plant. It only asks if you will keep planting." "Yes." "I think," she stopped, started again. "I think my mother would have said," another pause, "that the question has been answered." I let that sit in the room. Then I said, "What do you say?" She turned from the window and looked at me, and the Saleth * marks were doing the thing they did that I had no name for, not the amber of exertion, not the flat muted tone of suppression, but the deep steady gold that I had only seen here, in the lodge, in the moments when she was being entirely and exactly what she was. "I say," she said, "that you are Solis Verath *, that you belong on this range. That the lodge," she paused, "has not been cold in the evening since you started coming inside." I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that was as accurate as what she'd just said. After a moment she said, very quietly, "You may stay if you want to." I looked at her, at the Saleth * marks going steady and bright, at the lodge around us full of things that mattered, kept carefully, tended for years, at the window and the old growth light. "Yes," I said, "I want to." Part 8, what remains? I did not abandon the parcel. The fields needed tending. The fences needed maintenance. The sensor array needed its quarterly calibration. These were not things that stopped mattering because my life had changed. They were part of how my life had changed, part of the territory, part of what made the *Verath Sol * work. But I moved my cot to the lodge. The flat-pack furniture stayed on the parcel, because someone needed to maintain the structure and the equipment and the planted fields, and that someone was still me. But the cot moved, and the photograph of Lena and Petra moved. She had a place for it on the shelf near the window, beside the carved wood and the braided cord and the amber disc, and I thought about whether that felt wrong, and it didn't. It felt like what it was. Two people who had each lost their center of gravity, who had each kept going because the ground asked only that they keep planting, who had each found, not a replacement for what was lost, but an addition to what remained. Lena would have wanted me to keep planting. Petra would have thought the Saleth * marks were the best thing she had ever seen. She would have asked 73 questions about them in the first afternoon. I told Vareth this. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, 9 years old. Yes. She would have been a good age to learn the range, she said. The terrain assessment, reading the water levels. She paused. 11 is the age we begin formal range walking. I looked at her. I know, she said. I only mean, she sounds like someone who would have paid attention. She paid attention to everything. Vareth nodded. Something in her face was very careful and very precise. That is the best thing, she said, that a person can do. The Kathiri grain came up in the eastern field in the 7th month. I sent a sample to Don Hessler, who looked at it and then looked at me and said, with the specific expression of a man who has been on a frontier world long enough to recognize when something significant has happened and is choosing not to make a production of it. Range keeper's crop. In a settler's field. Yes, I said. How'd you manage that? Good drainage, I said, and someone who knows the land. He nodded slowly. She come to the northern parcels sometimes, he said. Checking the fence lines, he paused, she's always been careful with this range, more than she had to be. Yes, I said, she has. He looked at me a moment. You doing all right out here, Adler? I thought about the lodge, the Saleth asterisk marks going steady and gold in the evening, the photograph on the shelf, the Kathiri grain in the eastern field, the way she had said, with the precision of someone choosing to be exact, the lodge has not been cold in the evening since you started coming inside. Yes, I said. I think I am. The night after the grain came up, I was standing at the edge of the eastern field in the late dark, looking at it in the moonlight, 2 moons on Vale's Reach, one bright and close, one smaller and further, and together they made the Highland nights luminous in a way I had never found on a station. I heard her behind me. I always heard her now, not because she made noise, she almost never made noise, but because I had spent months learning the particular quality of the air when she was in it. She stood beside me and looked at the field. It came up straight, she said. Your seed stock. Your soil prep. We stood there for a while. The moons moved. The old growth at the field edge did something quiet in the wind. Varith, I said. Yes. The Solis line saying. She waited. The ground does not ask what broke you, I said. It only asks if you will keep planting. Yes. I turned and looked at her. The Saleth asterisk marks along her forearms and hands were bright in the moonlight, the deep steady gold, and they cast the faintest ambient warmth. And in that light she looked exactly like what she was, someone who had been keeping something alive for a very long time and had not stopped. I'm going to keep planting, I said. She looked at me. The Saleth asterisk marks did the thing they had done the first night in the lodge, the steady brightness that didn't flicker, that came from somewhere deeper than exertion or attention, from the place where things are simply true. Yes, she said. I know. She put her hand over mine, there at the edge of the field in the moonlight. Not a gesture I'd seen from her before which meant something about it. Her hand was warm, the Saleth asterisk mark still bright. Asterisk solis verath, she said quietly, not explaining it, not translating it, just saying it. Yes, I said, inside. We stood there for a while longer, at the edge of the field under 2 moons, on a world that had asked only one thing of either of us. And we kept planting. And